Right, I'm here representing the Paris masses. My daughter got hold of my notebooks, which I stuffed in an envelope, never looked at until my mother died, and I looked in a box and found she kept family letters. So I've got a collection of scrappy notes. My daughter also is a much better writer than I am, and I could ever be, so I'll leave it to you to read that. The only thing is, okay, so I'm approaching this not as a political activist, and not as somebody who's deeply rooted in the struggle. I'm somebody who is 17, who wants to go and see the world, and has never been abroad, and goes off hitchhiking early in March, so I missed the Vietnam demonstration, I'm aware of it. And I don't actually, all I want to do is to see the Alps, because I've heard about them. I like the idea of mountains, and I want to see the Mediterranean, which seems to me as far away as you can actually get in the world. So I travel around Germany and Switzerland and Italy and bits of Italy and France, and arrive back in Paris by accident. I can just say that the words that I clearly wrote also, when I first read them again, I couldn't remember. They weirdly fit the stories I used to tell my daughter as she was growing up. She couldn't believe that I wasn't lying and exaggerating, because that's my usual style. My experience was being in Paris for a few weeks. The day after the big demonstration, was it on the 13th of March? And I think I arrived about the 15th of March, and I was there till the end of the month. I had a place to stay. I was a Methodist, and I went along to the Methodist chapel that was there, and they had a room upstairs. Nobody was staying there because none of them could get back to Paris because of the general strike that was started 2 days after I arrived, and so I was given somewhere to stay for nothing, and I stayed with a bunch of different characters who were students who were doing different courses, mainly international students. So that was my experience. I went on lots of I went to the Sorbonne and the Odeon, and I heard lots of debates which sounded really important. And I whispered to people in my broken French or in English, what are they on about? And they seemed to go on for many hours, and I haven't got a clue. But what was most important to me was that the person usually said, are they just going on? I did get the impression as I went round that people did an awful lot of talking in France that I'd never really come across, and debated things for hours and hours. I didn't see any of these situationist sort of posters and artworks which now dominate the image of what May 68 was about. I saw lots of people digging up paving stones, chopping down trees. I saw burned out cars. I saw people fighting police and tear gas, but you can have a look at all of that. Okay, quick points I got from it. One was that it was the first time that actually I'd seen events of that sort. And I think I refer in there about revolution was taking place. At 17, just 18, it clearly was an experience I wasn't going to get anywhere else, and it was that clearly had deep effect on me. And I was debating it and arguing it with people, but it was also something that was completely unexpected, because it seemed to be going back to it was a big city, not very different. It was foreign, but it was still something that was familiar. And so all of the arguments which now I would probably present this was the first experience of the post-war situation where the working class were rising up in a general strike, etc. All I saw was that these events were happening. I also saw the hard side of the authorities. I'd never before seen rows of police in riot gear all pulling out their batons and charging down the street at me. I'd not seen people pulling out what I thought were guns, but might have been firing tear gas grenades at me, and I'd not seen people who were fighting back and throwing cobblestones and trying to stop people coming through. And so that level of violence surprised me. And I suppose the third one is that that political reality of all those discussions, all of the arguments, just in terms of the pictures I saw, and that's my only record, that's only my only proof I was there, was that it was pictures of Marx and Lenin and Mao Zedong and Trotsky were stuck up on the wall, and these people became part of my life. And now I'd read Marx and I'd read a Lenin pamphlet, over the previous year or two, that they became more real. Okay, I read that last week. Made me. It's really good. I recommend it. It's a collection of interviews with people who were there in '68, and I found most interesting the political. People tended to weigh it according to their own past experiences. So where did they come from? Their root. So I would say, first of all, a lot of the people that came in there. There's a situationist in there, an anarchist who. Right at the beginning, was clearly a big character. This guy basically led the struggle in Paris because he had occupied the Odeon, that was his idea. He had led demonstrations, it was all his idea. They put forward lists of demands, and when the questioner says, well, who decided these? He said, well, I wrote them. So there was one approach, which was some people seem to have a preconceived idea. They said it proved his theories, because obviously he wrote them himself. You had the Trotskyist leader, the JCR leader, Alain Krivine in there. It's about failure. He's seeing it as there is not a revolutionary leadership. He's excited by, and he's taken a leading role in organising the demonstrations, organising the initial spark that gets it off, the anti-Vietnam demonstration in the Latin Quarter, which and the arrests led to the things start sparking off. But he's frustrated by the fact that it's not happening. That there aren't many of the building blocks in place which could lead a revolution forward. And he's making judgments about the Communist Party and the CGT leadership who are trying to undermine the general strike and quickly do a deal. I saw none of that, but clearly you could see it. What I did see was maybe the experience of some of the other writers in there. And they come to it with different experiences. They come to it as CGT, that's the Communist-led trade union, or the Communist Party background. Some of them come having been involved with the Algerian revolutionary movement. Some of them come with no politics at all, or right-wing politics, and they get involved. I was taken to it, the fact I was a strong tribal supporter of the Labour Party. If there's any politics at home, endless political discussions at home, it was the Labour Party and the Labour Party stories of the past. So the last time I'd heard of a general strike, it was my dad being taken on my granddad's shoulders, and they both told me the story, down to the demonstrations in Pontypool Park in 1926, and the miners' strikes and things like that. But they were coming back again. Okay. Then there's the other thing. What my daughter touches on is mentioning other things influenced me. So as I travelled around, what is important is May '68 wasn't about Paris, it was about all of the things going on. So I remember distinctly sharing in the Vietnam struggle on the American side, because I got a lift across southern France with two American GIs who were having a break, who were having a leave, and they gave me a lift, and then they stopped to drop me off, and they said, hang on, open the boot of the car, and inside it was packed with frontline rations which they'd nicked from their base near Frankfurt. And I lived for about 5 days on frontline rations, which were all stamped with American stamps, and in that I've never eaten so well because the quality of what they were eating in those jungles, I didn't believe that they could heat up in one little pack like that. They could make slices of roast beef in gravy and potatoes and 2 vegetables, and then for pudding you had things like rich fruit cake, and you could have a cream on there as well. And I had this image of them all sat there in swamps up to here, with leeches eating them, just like in Platoon and things like that. And they're all actually trying to make all this crap on, Anyway, secondly, I remember travelling with a Portuguese guy who was running away from the draft in Portugal, and the experience of Salazar and the war starting and hotting up in Africa, because he said he couldn't go back there. And I remember also travelling with a Spanish anarchist who couldn't go back to Spain because of Franco. I remember that I was in Germany staying with a guy who lost a leg because he was in the Luftwaffe, whose family were refugees from Silesia. So they were members of the family who'd been strafed by British planes in their story. as they tried to flee west. He took me up to see the Iron Curtain in the Harz Mountains and the rows of barbed wire and that science, seeing the world and that radicalisation, all those bits coming together, actually I see as 1968. As well as, and just quickly before I finish, is that you hear some of the music playing, and really what I took to my travels was probably not so much Marx or radical politics, it was more images from beat poets and Jack Kerouac, and listening to John Renbourn in Nottingham folk clubs going on about going down the National 7 as a long and lonely road, and they built an autobahn. When I came back to Nottingham as a student after that summer, actually the first thing I'd done when I came back was I picked up a book called Mayday Manifesto, which seemed to be nothing to do with what I'd seen in Europe as I travelled around. It was really quite tedious, my memory of it, although today it reminds me a lot of left Labour policies today ahead of its time. And clearly I'm much more impressed by its scholarship now and its important drive. But it was out of date in my view. What I did find was that the first meeting I went to was the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign in Nottingham University. And then I remember standing up in the Christian Association meeting in Nottingham University, said, everyone, we must all go. If you're real Christians, you must be out on the Vietnam demonstration in October. My daughter says in here that it showed me there were lots of things about me when I was 17 and 18, which are still there today. And the best thing about it is I still don't often get to places on time because I miss the bus to go down to London. Finally, I can't separate that year without the fact that later that year, because of the course I was doing, I was in Northern Ireland and remember seeing distinctly all of these signs of the anti-papist, papist die everywhere, the Orange Order, sitting in a pub at 1 o'clock in the morning drinking poteen in Ballycastle, being told how gerrymandering worked by people who said every time we get a Catholic majority here, they expand the boundaries so there's more rural areas. I remember what a dreadful place walking through Derry was, and a number of us, the threats and insults, and the news of what was going on in Northern Ireland. And I think that all of those things together, probably unsurprisingly, my Christian socialism began to weaken, because that's what I was at that stage, under the influence of people like Julian, Mike and others in the IMG. I was in as well to the IMG later in 1970.